Hello, world. This is the first time I've gone live, but we just got the very, I guess, not that surprising considering her age, but it's still shocking news that Queen Elizabeth II has passed away this afternoon. So this is a pretty big event, kind of a once in a lifetime, certainly once in many generations event that I think we were all expecting would happen in the next few years. But I was certainly surprised, shocked when I saw the news, when my husband came in and told me, oh my goodness, check the news, she just passed away. And it was 3 minutes old that she died. So I'm still kind of in shock. I just finished editing a video that I had ready to go. One that I actually ended up releasing in June for her Jubilee because I thought, well, she still has probably several more years. I mean, she could easily live. Her mother died at 102, so I was sort of thinking 96. She's still a spring chicken. She could still go for a few more years. But she did pass away today at Balmoral Estate in Scotland. And now Charles is officially king. The moment that the previous monarch dies, the new monarch, the heir apparent, becomes the monarch. So Charles is the king. There's no question of him passing it on to William or stepping down. Things may come up that way later on. I have explored that quite a bit in my videos. I have a video about that I just released back in June, I believe, called What Will Happen When the Queen Dies. So that's a very good one to go check out. Actually, just put that back up on my community page. So what will happen when the Queen dies? And I walk through the steps of what will happen to her body, what will the funeral process look like, and then what's going to happen with Charles, with the ascension, with the coronation, and also looking into a big announcement to look out for tomorrow, probably tomorrow morning. The Ascension Council will meet at St. James Palace, where they've met since the Middle Ages, I believe. They will come out probably tomorrow morning or possibly the next day and officially declare Charles the king. He is already the king as of the moment his mother died today, but they will officially announce that he is the king. And then they will also likely announce what his regnal name will be. So that means the name that he's going to rule as. And he would be Charles III if he goes with Charles, because Charles I got his head chopped off during the English Civil War, and Charles II was a notorious womanizer, and then there was a pretender to the throne named Charles III. That name may not be the one that he goes with. That has a lot of really negative associations with the English monarchy. I still always wonder, why did Elizabeth name her son that when there's so many bad associations with it? And then his infidelities with Camilla have compounded that. His sort of unpopularity or questioned popularity over his life have really kind of shown a light on the negative associations with that name. So a lot of royal insiders have said that he might actually go with the name of George as his regnal name. So he would be King George VII, if that's what he goes with. His grandfather, Queen Elizabeth's father, was George VI. He was very popular. He was the king during World War II. And he was just highly praised as a very popular king, very dutiful to his family, to his country. He's not known probably to have ever had any mistresses, which is somewhat unusual in the British royal family. So George would be a very positive association to have. So that's where my money's at. I think he'll probably go with George VII. But as I said, we'll probably find out tomorrow morning when the Ascension Council comes out St. James Palace to announce him officially as the king. Another thing that we pretty much knew was coming, but was interesting, is that the palace, in their statement about the Queen's death, said that the new king and the Queen consort will spend tonight at Balmoral and then return to London in the morning. So that means that Camilla is officially according to the palace, she has been called the Queen Consort. And I believe when the Ascension Council announced that, they will also include something about her being Queen Consort. It also remains to be seen if she will be crowned when Charles has his coronation. Traditionally, when there is an English or British king, then their Queen Consort is crowned, if there is one at the time, is crowned with them. So there's a whole part of the coronation ceremony that they will be crowned with their own crown in Westminster Abbey as part of the ceremony. So it remains to be seen if Camilla will be crowned, and the coronation will most likely wait up to a year, possibly longer. They're not going to do it tomorrow morning as a sign of respect to the Queen and her passing. They typically will wait about a year to do the next coronation. It's possible that it will happen next summer, because they do tend to want to do a lot of royal events, and especially in the recent past, they like to do them in the summer. Like they saved the Jubilee. That the Queen actually hit her 70th anniversary in February, the anniversary of her father's death, but they saved the celebration and the bank holiday weekend and everything until June, when the weather would be better, and they get more beautiful pictures. They're not going to get rained out. Everyone can come out and celebrate the new monarch and the coronation. So my guess is summer of 2023, possibly 2024, but probably 2023. They'll have the coronation in London, and that will be probably a pretty big event. Probably they'll throw out all the stops. It'll cost the taxpayers about $1 billion to have that, to throw that big event for Charles. It might be slightly subdued because Charles and Camilla are not super popular. I hear a lot of pushback from British fans that they are actually pretty popular in Britain, which is interesting because I'm in the US, although I grew up in England. But here in the US, the news has historically been pretty different. The news that we get on the British family has actually been more open about, and I was just working on a video about this morning, about media coverage of the British royal family. So it's fresh in my mind. But like a lot of things, like the abdication of Edward VIII was widely covered, sensationalized here in the United States, and the British press was totally mum on it. So it's just interesting that in America, maybe we look at it a little bit more like a soap opera, but we might get more information because information is not sort of like carefully monitored by the palace here as it is in Britain, censored, I would say. So yeah, the perception in America is that he's not very popular, but I do hear from British fans that actually he is more popular. Camilla is more popular. They've kind of done a lot to rehab his reputation, which is another thing that I'm working on a video for. So we'll see now with this. I release that video. It might be, I was planning on it for when Harry's supposed to release his autobiography towards the end of the year. I was kind of planning this video to talk about it then, but it might come out sooner or later. I'll have to see. This all kind of throws my schedule into an upheaval. But yeah, I mean, I'm seeing a ton of comments here, and from what I'm scanning, it's just, yeah, it seems like people are really kind of shocked by her death. Or I don't know if that's quite the right word, because you can't really be shocked by the death of a 96-year-old, but she's been the queen for as long as 5 out of 6 Britons have been alive, for my entire life, and long before my parents' entire lives, about all of my grandparents' entire lives. She's always been the Queen of England, the queen of the UK and the Commonwealth realm. So it's just kind of, it's shocking. It's overwhelming. It's the end of an era, beginning of a new era. There've been so much, the palace has kind of been grooming. Okay, well, we are going to have Charles, and there's still a lot of question about how well he will do as a monarch if he can avoid scandal, avoid I think the biggest concern with him at this age, and we're not too worried about him having, mistresses and affairs or anything like that, but he might interfere with politics. He's been very politically outspoken for years, which is something that the Queen was always very careful not to do, or to do, very privately with her private meetings, the Prime Minister, to not. But the British monarch, because it's a constitutional monarchy, they are absolutely barred from taking sides politically. And if they do, it can create a constitutional crisis. It's, I don't know if that single-handedly would abolish the monarchy, but it's a very bad look for the monarchy anytime that Elizabeth has seemed to toe the line for speaking out politically. It's been a very bad look for the British monarchy, and Charles has continuously towed the line and crossed the line of making political statements, petitioning government officials, and then even a story recently, about I think a year or two, broke in the Guardian, that both he and the Queen had been interfering with over 100 laws. They'd found that they'd interfered with over 100 laws to sort of prevent things that might cause them trouble, might expose their finances. So it remains to be seen if Charles can live up to the expectations of the monarch that his mother set so brilliantly for so many years. She did such a good job of being this kind of mother of the nation, and being very careful not to step the line politically. We'll see how that goes. Really quickly, I'm gonna stay on here, and I'm looking at comments. I just saw that my video for the Queen's Life has finished exporting, so I'm just going to upload that very quickly. So it's ready. I created a while ago, and then I've just added in some updates, and obviously information about her passing today. It still kind of chokes me up whenever I say it, because I feel like it's like a TV show I've been watching for years, or like people that I know, like my own grandmother. And I have read so much and studied so much about her life, just because of my own interest, but also because of the YouTube channel. Oh, I'm having trouble with me off of a hotspot on my phone, so that's fun. So it's just popping up saying that my internet connection is not great. Let me just quickly post this video, and then I'll get back to you. It's the longest, right? I love seeing your comments. I'm kind of this is the first time I've ever gone live, so I'm just kind of, oh no, what's that? Kind of winging it, I guess. I feel like I've thought for a while about what I should do, and I was ready when Prince Philip passed away with the video, because BBC isn't going to shut down and not talk about this, talk about the Queen's passing and talk about what's going on out of respect. That doesn't really make any sense to me. This is my business. I do want to get views, but also, I think I want to kind of talk about my feelings and be a place for people to come when they're talking about and thinking about the Queen and her passing, and what this means, and the historic context of all this incredibly long life that the Queen has had. It's once in like more than several lifetimes that I've written about so much, and owed our lifetime. So it's kind of shocking and awe-inspiring and sad and tragic and just really remarkable. Let me finish posting this. All the days. All right, get a thumbnail. Thumbnail. Something for kids. babe. I'm live. Charles going to come out tomorrow as Charles the Third or George the Seventh? Tell me what your prediction is. What are the Vegas betting odds on that? Next. Oh, this is uploading so slowly. Oh my gosh, of all the days for the internet to be down. It's stuck at 1%. Like, oh. I'm seeing a lot of Charles the Thirds, not seeing many Georges. Oh, they did. Okay. No, thanks for telling me something. I've been so like frazzled with trying to get out a new video that I haven't been able to check the news as much as I'd like. Good. Thanks for letting me know. Yeah, I am surprised, I guess, by why are we calling him George when he's always been Charles? So, you know, that makes sense that he'll be Charles. So Charles the Third. Here we go. How did she die? I mean, I think she's 96 years old. Sure it was natural causes. She had several health. I think there's a lot of statistics on people don't tend to long outlive a spouse, especially at such an old age. You know, it's been a difficult couple of years with COVID and with it seems like there's always been new drama with the royal family, but the last few years have been especially difficult, I'm sure, for the Queen with the passing of her husband, with the scandals around Prince Andrew being involved with Jeffrey Epstein and being accused of rape, and also with the fracture in the royal family between Prince Harry and Prince William and Prince Charles. So yeah, you know, I'm sure that they took their toll on the Queen, but still 96 years, 70 years on the throne is a remarkable achievement. Something, you know, for her to have been proud of. I'm sure she was very proud, and you know, for the nation to be proud of, for her continuity. It's something that will be interesting going forward. You know, Charles is in his 70s. His parents' longevity, it's likely that he will, or it may be we may have William sooner, depending on if Charles steps down or if something happens where Charles is his hand is forced to step down. If he does something that's questionable that causes a constitutional crisis, you know, we'll see what happens in the next few years. William may not be king until he's you know, well past middle age, or maybe sooner. Who's to say? I'm just reading the comments. Charles would need some severe rebranding. Yeah, I mean, I think that they have done a lot to try and looking at the saints and sinners in the British royal family. It seems like I wish there was a new thing. Babe, my video is uploading. It's 3% view. If there's anything that we can do faster. All right. Yeah, that it seems like in the press and kind of what the palace releases and doesn't allow the press to talk about, they do kind of cast members of the British family as, you know, the heir, the monarch, is kind of the good person, the morally upright person, and then the somebody else is as less so. So I think, it's kind of a sad thing to say, but Andrew kind of makes Charles look better. So we'll see if that improves his public image, or has improved his public image. But yeah, let's talk more about the Queen. I think I'm thinking a lot towards the future and what Charles will mean, but it is important to look back at the remarkable life that the Queen has had, and all of the things that she's seen, that she's been a part of, all the history. Yeah, it's just it's a remarkable moment in history. She was born in 1926. She was born by cesarean section, which is interesting. That was a lot less common at the time, and had a very happy childhood, happy life with her father, mother, and younger sister Margaret. Nobody really expected her to become the monarch when she was born, because her father was the one who was in line to rule, to be the king. And he did very briefly become the king. He became the king for about 11 months, and then he was forced to decide between if he wanted to remain king or if he wanted to marry the woman that he loved, Wallis Simpson, who was twice divorced. And at the time, the British monarchy, the Church of England condoned divorce. It was not acceptable. Members of the immediate royal family had not been divorced since Henry VIII. So she was not considered to be an acceptable queen consort. So in this huge scandal, which was, of course, covered much more in the American media, the British media really kept mum about it, he abdicated. And the British public was pretty shocked when he came on the radio to announce that he was abdicating in favor of his younger brother, George VI. American media was not shocked, because it had been all over the American newspapers for months that this was going on. But so he did abdicate. His younger brother became George VI. He very famously had a stammer, popularly portrayed in the movie The King's Speech. He had a stammer. He was very shy, painfully shy, greatly because of abuse that he'd had as a child from his, partly from his father and also from a nanny. So he was not prepared to be king. He never thought that he would be king, but he took it on. He had little choice, and he became one of Britain's most famous, most brilliant, best loved kings of in recent history, probably maybe in any history. So that was Elizabeth's father. She absolutely adored him. Both she and Margaret adored him. He said, Elizabeth is my pride and Margaret is my joy. He just adored his daughters. There was question as to why they never tried to have more children, tried to have a son, especially after Edward abdicated and George became the king. Because at the time it was expected that a son would become the king. There was male preference primogeniture, which meant that brothers always cut the line ahead of their sisters to become the monarch. Women were still included in the succession, which was not unusual. There were several countries that did that, but France, for instance, had agnatic primogeniture, where women were completely barred. Women and their descendants were completely barred from the succession. But getting back to what I was saying, people did wonder and question why George and his wife, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, didn't try to... It's reconnecting. Let me charge that. Plug this in. There was question as to why they didn't try to have more children, try to have a son that could be in the line of succession, especially because at the time when they were young, when they had their two daughters, Edward VIII he wasn't king yet, but he was a playboy. He wasn't married. There was question as to his suitability to become king. And so they sort of thought, well, it was a possibility. At least George V, their father, definitely thought it was a possibility that George could be king. He was Prince Albert at the time. Um, but the reason why they didn't want to have any more children is because Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon had a lot of reproductive problems, difficulties. She'd had cesarean sections with both of her daughters and had a difficult time with her recovery. And so they made a decision as a couple that they were very happy with having with their two wonderful daughters who they just absolutely adored, somewhat unusual for the British aristocracy. And that's kind of fantastic that they were just like, we're not just going to try for a boy at the expense of Elizabeth's health. We're happy with our two daughters, and it'll be what it'll be. Had they tried more, I mean, medical science was at the point where Elizabeth may have survived. It wasn't nearly what it was in the past of, high childhood and maternal mortality like it had been a few generations earlier. But, they might have tried for a boy. And if they had a younger son, then he would have skipped the line and become king instead of Elizabeth. But they didn't. They had their two daughters. They were happy with that. They stopped trying to have more children. And then we got Elizabeth II as the queen. So she adored her father. She was at the point when he became king in 1937, I think 36. I think it was December of 1936. She was the heir presumptive, which is an important distinction between the heir apparent and the heir presumptive. So those lovely videos of them at her father's coronation, and they're wearing these little mini princess crowns and waving to the crowd. So her family probably knew that they were done having children, that she would most likely be the queen someday when her father passed away. But the public didn't know, and legally the king still could have had a son at some point who would have ousted Elizabeth. So through she was heir presumptive, which means that she could have been displaced in right. It's always been the Princess of Wales is the title of the wife of the Prince of Wales, because until recently, any woman who was the heir to any woman who was the heir to the monarch would have always been any woman who was heir to the monarch would have always been heir presumptive, because there's always the door open for that chance, however slim, that the monarch might have a legitimate son and displace the female as heir apparent. So there's never been a Princess of Wales in her own right. There's never been a female heir apparent to the British throne. There still isn't. There may be in the future if a British monarch or a British heir to the throne has an eldest daughter who has their eldest child is female. In that case, because they changed the succession laws in 2017, and now they have absolute primogeniture, so women and men have equal standing in the line of succession. So there could be in the future. There isn't at this point. So now Charles is the monarch, Charles III. Thanks for telling me. He is Charles III. So now that means that William is the heir apparent to the throne. I don't believe that he's officially the Prince of Wales at this point. In fact, I'm almost positive that he's not the Prince of Wales automatically. The Prince of Wales is something that is appointed by the monarch. So Charles will have to then officially create him Prince of Wales. And probably they will do an investiture ceremony that's been pretty traditional in the British royal family going back a few generations. Charles had an investiture ceremony at Carnarvon Castle in Wales sometime in the 1960s when he was a teenager. And Prince Edward VIII had a similar ceremony. I'm not sure if it goes back much further than that. I'm going to work on a series in the next couple months on all the princes of Wales and look into them, especially the ones who never became king, because they predeceased their father. And that was, I was kind of wondering, like, well, what's going to happen with Charles? Is he going to predecease his mother and be Prince of Wales but never be king? But now we know that he has outlived his mother. He is the king. It kind of chokes me up whenever I think about that. seeing a lot of L's on here. I'm not sure what that's all about. Yeah, so getting back to Princess Elizabeth's life, she, as a young woman, she was educated in the palace, which was very typical, especially of women, but pretty much of royals at the time. They weren't really attending schools, public schools, outside schools, boarding schools, going to university. Some of the princes had attended university before then. Elizabeth did not do that. She was educated at home by tutors. She, hey babe, did you get some water? Thank you. Oh, perfect. Thanks. Sorry, my husband's helping me out. She was educated by tutors at the palace. There's my dog. She's helping out too. And she, when she was 13 years old, she first met her distant cousin, second cousin through Christian IX of Denmark, third cousin through Queen Victoria, who was Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. His family had been ousted from the Greek throne when he was 2 years old. The family escaped Greece. He was 1 or 2 years old. He was carried in an orange cart, and they fled the country because they were in big trouble. And the family is interesting that they're Greek and Danish, because I did a video all about this, but one of Christian IX's sons, Christian IX of Denmark's sons, was elected to be King of Greece, which is something that happened occasionally back then. A country didn't have their monarchy, was ousted for one reason or another, and so they would elect a member of another royal family to become the new monarch. This happened with the German prince became the King of Finland in the 1910s, I believe, and it just happened a few times, strangely, in history. That might make a good video to talk about all the people who were elected king from other families. So anyway, so this Danish family, this Danish prince became King of Greece. And so that's why Prince Philip's family was the Greek and Danish royal family. And although so they're very Danish, he looks like a Viking. People even said that in his lifetime. He's blonde and he looks like a Viking. But his family ruled over Greece. He didn't look Greek at all. I don't think he had any Greek blood. He did have a grandmother who was Russian, and he was very closely related to the Romanovs. In fact, he gave the key DNA sample that identified the bodies of the Romanov family that when they had been found. So he was one of their closest living relatives. And then his mother was German and was also a descendant of Queen Victoria. So that's how he was fairly closely related to Queen Elizabeth. They met when she was 13 and he was, I believe, 18, still a teenager, but quite a bit older than her. And he was a young officer in the Navy and at Dartmouth, I think. Might be thinking of American military schools. But her family went to tour his naval academy, and they met then, and they began a correspondence, which in the beginning was fairly innocent. They were cousins. They were friendly. She, though, had a mad crush on him and, continued to hold a torch for him for years. I actually just read a book recently, a novel, but it was called The Rose Code, which I recommend. It's a really good novel about him as a young man in the military in World War II. And part of it's based on reality, that he was dating a young woman who was a code breaker at Bletchley Park. And they were dating and they were possibly kind of serious. But then after the war, and of course the novel dramatizes it, but he left her for Elizabeth. And when she was 18, 19, they got more serious and cared about her. It wasn't just, a royal match. And she obviously was very attracted to him and very interested in him, and was very determined that he was the man for her. And although her family really didn't think he was suitable, and we're just coming out of the era of of arranged marriages, of, getting the best possible highest ranking prince for your princess and vice versa, and not really caring about, would they get along, would they like each other, would they be attracted to each other, even were they close in age. Elizabeth's father was one of the first generation, actually the first generation of British royals to have a love match. He fell in love with Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. She liked him, but wasn't super keen to be a royal, but he talked her into it. Um, and so this idea of marrying someone that you love rather than someone who's considered appropriate was very new. Still, look at how the royal family ousted Camilla in favor of Diana is still very much a lingering legacy that they have of picking a spouse who is appropriate. Elizabeth was determined, a young princess, in her late teens, early 20s. She was determined that Philip was the man for her, and her family didn't agree. They thought he's a king without a country, or a prince without a country. His family is disgraced. They're ousted from the Greek monarchy. His cousin later, Constantine II, I believe, did later take the throne back for a few years, but then was ousted again. But yeah, they didn't think that he was a good candidate to be a future king. And even more damning is he had 4 older sisters, and 3 of them were married to Nazis. One of his sisters, Celie, had very sadly perished in a plane crash along with her, I believe, her husband and her children. It was a very tragic event for Philip when he was a young man, as they were very close. But 3 of his 4 sisters were married to Nazis. There was a lot of question about his loyalty. Was he loyal? And even though he had served in the British military and been a war hero and actually saved his ship with the clever maneuver, I think it was something about they sent out a ship with fireworks on it and distracted the Germans from bombing their ship, and he saved his ship. So he was a British war hero, but there was still question about, was he loyal? Was he were these to the Nazis and his family? Was that a big problem? But Elizabeth was determined, and they got married. They got married in 1947. It was still, the war was over. But rationing was still very much taking place. In America, like, those were the boom years. The years after the war were boom years for us. But Britain was still very much under rationing, still having economic problems. So the cake was rationed. The Girl Scouts of Australia sent a bunch of dried fruit, and they used many gallons of Navy rum to make this traditional fruit cake, which is what the British royals always have for their wedding, is fruit cake, because it keeps a long time. It's chock full of liquor. And even the Kate and I think that the Sussexes, they did something else. They did like a lemon cake or something. But Kate and Will, they had a fruit cake. So she had this massive fruit cake, which was the bits and pieces were donated for rationing, and she very famously used ration cards to buy the lace and silk for her wedding dress. She wore, I think she wore the Queen Mary fringe tiara, which was her grandmother, Queen Mary of Teck. They were very close. Queen Mary left her most of her jewelry, and they had a very close, loving relationship. Although Queen Mary was quite cold to her own children, especially the oldest, Edward VIII. She made up for it with being a very warm, loving grandmother. So I think that's really beautiful that they had that nice relationship. And Queen Mary, who I've mentioned before, and people always get me on this, that she was a kleptomaniac, and she wasn't really a kleptomaniac, but she loved antiques. She loved jewelry. She ordered a lot of very nice, very expensive jewelry, which she was criticized for. But she she did have this habit, which is documented, that she would go and visit people in the country, visit friends, visit relatives, which is a normal thing. And she would say, "Oh, I absolutely adore that piece of pottery, or that little trinket. Oh, I love it," and just drop very heavy hints that she would very much like it if they would give it to her. And she even, like, if they kind of ignored her, like, "Oh yes, sure," then she would just go, and on her way out, she would say, "Oh, I must just simply go back in and say goodbye to that little statuette that I loved in the drawing room." And then they would get the hint and they would hand it over. So she wasn't actually a kleptomaniac. She wasn't like sneaking things in her handbag, but she earned a reputation in the upper class of hide your nice things when Queen Mary comes to visit. She was very interested in the history of the royal family. She actually was a cousin of Queen first cousin, I believe, of Queen Victoria, through George III. So she was also, a very close relative of the family, and it was her family too that she loved the history of. So anything that was associated with the Windsor's family, the Windsor history, any pieces that had been sold off or given away by previous generations, she wanted to reaccumulate, to kind of keep the family history together, and all of their antiques and important and important pieces together. So yeah, Queen Mary of Teck and Elizabeth had a very nice relationship. Mary, skipping ahead slightly, Mary died right before Elizabeth became queen. I believe she died after her son died, after George VI died, but it was like right on the eve of when Elizabeth was going to have her coronation. And Mary, obviously knew she was getting elderly. She was having health problems. She knew that her death was a near possibility and might interfere with the plans for Elizabeth to have her coronation. And she said, "I do not want my death to interfere with my granddaughter's coronation. I want her coronation to go ahead. She's the new queen. Mourn me for a few days and then get on with the coronation." So again, in addition to all the nice jewelry and tiaras, that was a loving gift that she gave to her daughter, to her granddaughter, to not want to take the spotlight away from her. So slightly rewinding in history, again, looking at Elizabeth's life. Elizabeth and Philip married in 1947. I can't remember where they had their honeymoon. I want to say on the yacht Britannia. It was a pretty common place to go, maybe Sandringham. Tell me in the comments if you know. And they quickly had two children, Charles first, and then Anne second. Charles was 58 or 59, and then Princess Anne was in 1960. So they had these two young children. This was all still while Elizabeth was princess. Her father was alive. And Charles always had a very close relationship with his grandmother, who was Queen Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, Elizabeth's mother. So they had a very sweet, loving relationship. And Anne was very close with her father. They always were very close. Prince Philip said that he thought that Anne was the son he always wanted. So they were just peas in a pod. They got along very well. And Elizabeth, she and Philip, so Philip was still in the Navy when they married. He was stationed in Malta for about a year and a half, I believe. When they were pretty young, they left Charles. I'm not sure if Anne was born at that. I think it was in between Charles and Anne. They left Charles at home with his grandparents, probably why they bonded. And Elizabeth really enjoyed about a year and a half of living in Malta, being the wife of a naval officer. It was her first time to get away from the palace, from being a princess, from the responsibility and the public exposure and the media, which again was not nearly what it is now or what it came to be in the 80s and 90s. But she just really loved going to beach parties and balls, and I just love the pictures of them and her in her big Dior New Look 1950s dresses and them on the beach in Malta and just having a nice time being a young couple, being out of the spotlight for the first and really only time in her life. So they came back to the UK after his time in Malta was over. By this point, her father, George VI, was having some serious health problems. He'd been a heavy smoker for all of his life, exacerbated by the pressures of World War II. Again, he was really working overtime. That's why he was such a war hero. So he was very involved in the war effort. And Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, they toured the country constantly. They were trying to boost public morale. So they were just really, really working overtime to boost morale, to keep the country together, to keep the country going through this really terrible, difficult time. And that was so much stress on King George. It really was a huge deteriorating factor in his health. I'm sure he smoked a lot more because of all this pressure that he had to keep the country together. And, you know, that we know now, like, oh, the Britain was victorious in the war. And at the time they had no idea that they would win. Or I'm sure, you know, went back and forth. Sometimes you thought you'd win, sometimes you didn't. But living in that time, Hitler was on your front door, and it was a very real possibility that the Germans might take over Britain, might conquer Britain, and oust the royal family. Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, there was a very serious threat of them being kidnapped by German agents, and so that's why when Buckingham Palace was bombed during the war, shortly before, I think, when it was a threat, when they started blitzing London, Elizabeth and King George decided that they needed to get the girls somewhere safer. They refused to leave London. They would not be seen, you know, lying down on their duty and leaving London, but they sent their daughters to live at Windsor Castle, which is, you know, almost 1,000-year-old castle, I think, it used to be during bombs, and it was far enough away from London that it wasn't getting blitzed regularly. So they lived, the young girls lived there during a lot of the war. And Elizabeth very famously was part of the Women's Auxiliary Territorial Service. I think that's the right term. So she had her little uniform, and she was a mechanic on trucks, and she drove military trucks as part of the auxiliary service to help the war effort, which I just love those photos of her in her little uniform, and she just looks so proud to be doing her bit. Kind of chokes me up to think about it. So that was sort of her war, while she was all the while writing to Philip, who was, you know, he was in the Mediterranean for a lot of the war, on ships fighting for. So this is why when I sit down and write, I have a narrative, because my mind goes back and forth through history and different subjects a lot. So it's good to have it all written down and reviewed. But since I'm just brainstorming right now about Elizabeth's amazing life, I'm kind of going back and forth. So sorry about that. So I think we were at her father being very ill, and I backtracked because talking about why he was so ill was World War II. So he'd had a lung removed because of his smoking, because of his long smoking habit. So he'd had a lung removed. His health was deteriorating. He was not able to go on tours and do philanthropy, do charitable work as is expected of the monarch, as he'd always done. He was just not up to it. So Philip left the Navy, and Elizabeth came back to the UK. They had their second child, Anne, somewhere around that time, and they stepped in to become working royals, to become a bigger part of the royal family, to take responsibility off of the shoulders of George VI, because he needed to rest. So she took it on. The King and Queen, George VI and Elizabeth, were supposed to go on a tour of the Commonwealth, on this massive, long, several-month tour of the Commonwealth, but he was not up to it. So they decided to keep the tour, and Elizabeth and Philip were going to embarked on this this multi-month, I think it might have supposed to have been like 6 or 9 months tour of the British Commonwealth. And last night, let's see, it's saying an hour and 49 minutes. No sign of internet coming back. Oh my gosh. All right, I'm debating what's more important, to stay on the live stream or get this video uploaded faster. I have no idea how this live is. I'm seeing a ton of comments go up, but I have no idea how this is doing. But I'm just, for myself, I'm enjoying reliving, talking about Elizabeth's life. I feel like it's kind of cathartic to think about her at this moment. Oh, thanks. To stay on the stream, love. We can still hear you. Great. Thanks for being there with me. So while they were on the I think one of the first stops of the trip, they were in Kenya, and they went out in the bush. This is the first episode of The Crown, if anyone's a Crown fan. They were out in the bush for a few days, and then they got back to their base where they had some communications, and that's when they heard the news that George VI had died. This was 1952, February of 1952, and that Elizabeth was the queen. As I said at the beginning of this, when the current monarch dies, the new monarch becomes the monarch. They ascend the throne the moment that the previous monarch died. So Elizabeth had already been queen for several hours before she even knew that she was queen. And it's rather sad, rather tragic that she was not at her father's bedside when he died. I'm sure that's something that she always really felt sad about in her life, because that was and is the tradition that, as soon as the monarch seems to be not doing well, seems to be on their deathbed, then they call their whole family to them, especially the heir to the throne, to come and be with them and their passing. That was how it was with, all the monarchs that I can think of. There haven't been a lot of British monarchs in recent history in the last several hundred years that died suddenly. It was usually some form of natural causes or illness that was known about in enough time that the family could come and the heir could come and be with them. But Elizabeth was not with her father when he died. He did have, I think, a very nice final day. He spent it with his grandchildren, Charles and Anne, who he adored, and with Margaret and his beloved wife, Elizabeth. They spent a nice day. I think they were at Sandringham, which was, one of their favorite estates, after they'd waved Elizabeth goodbye a few days earlier and gone to Sandringham to rest and relax and have a little vacation. And while they were there, they spent the day, they had dinner together. They looked at family albums, remembered old memories. And then I guess early in the morning or at night, George passed away in his sleep. So I suppose his family wasn't surrounding his bedside, waiting for his final breath, but he'd spent the day with them. He was with them, and knew how loved he was, and I'm sure that he knew how much he was loved by his daughter Elizabeth, even though she was far away, but she was doing work in his service and in the service of Britain and of the UK and the Commonwealth. And I'm sure that he knew that his legacy was safe in her hands, that she was, she had the makings of a phenomenal queen. Nobody knew how long her life would be at this point. We didn't know at that point that her mother was going to live to be 32, and that, she had that longevity in her family. Previous 68 when he passed away. So, nobody knew how long she would be queen, but she certainly had the makings of fabulous. Fabulous isn't the right word, but just she had a very strong sense of duty, sense of right, duty to her family and to her country, which was exactly what her father and her grandfather had. That made them both standout monarchs, and looking back previous generations at the Georgian kings, who were just constant scandal and mistresses, and very little concern for the country. They were mostly concerned about, especially George IV, just like building his fabulous palaces and his chasing after mistresses. And, Queen Victoria kind of rehabbed the monarchy's reputation. And, there had been scandals in the past with, Queen Elizabeth, or Edward VII was a surprisingly good king, but still pretty scandal laden with his 50+ mistresses. And then with George V was kind of a dull, boring, steady king. Did what he had to do. Did a good job with World War I, with the Irish Home Rule Bill. Prevented civil war with Ireland by letting that go, by letting them have the Home Rule Bill. And then Edward VIII, huge scandal. But George VI was riddled her life and her career as monarch after her father, and she had a fantastic example for how to be a monarch. She's been often criticized for being kind of cold, stiff upper lip, not being maybe as warm as she could have been, or as people would have liked her to be towards members of her own family, to her children-in-law. But she was also very noted for her warmth, for her personal touch, for, when she would meet people in public and shake their hand and have a word with them and really make people feel special. And they had a moment with the Queen, and that she was kind and respectful to them. And, she I think she did kind of take herself pretty seriously, but she still had a, kind of a funny sense of things, and got along well with people, and seemed to have a good rapport, good sense of humor with her husband, Philip. And she had very, very different relationships with I think it was 14 or 15 different prime ministers that came and went during her lifetime. And I mean, she just got another one. So I guess I probably should have updated that, because like just days ago, they announced there's a new British prime minister. I don't even know if she got a chance to meet her. But yeah, so that's another one that she's had a lot of prime ministers have come and gone, and some she's had great relationships with, some they haven't gotten along as well. But it is true that every week she's met with the prime minister. I'm not sure if that continued. I'm actually not sure if that continued through COVID, or if they did like Zoom meetings or something during COVID. Obviously, it wouldn't be a great idea to meet during COVID face to face with she was 94, 95 during the COVID years, and she did get COVID, but recovered from that. I don't know if that was, possibly a contributing factor to her death, or maybe, caused some problems that caused her to die a little earlier than she might have. I'm not sure. That's news that we may get in the future, or may never get. But yeah, she did meet with prime ministers very regularly. She was she played her role as a constitutional monarch, which is to not be involved in politics. She is supposed to, whatever the frame is, advise and warn the prime minister and the government, but not publicly, very privately, to give her concerns or her feelings to the government. Because, I mean, the monarch traditionally from being political, because if they did get into the political fray, it's pretty unfair, frankly, to whichever party they're against, or whatever politician they might be against, or decision or whatever. When Queen Victoria had a couple of scandals early on in her reign, where she famously, she wouldn't change her ladies in waiting. Sorry, she had all of the ladies in waiting that she'd appointed were liberals, and then when there was a change of government, the new prime minister requested that she appoint some Tory, some conservative ladies in waiting. I'm not going to replace my friends, but that was a huge scandal. The prime minister refused to take office, and she was vilified in the press. And so after that, Queen Victoria really learned that she needed to stay in line politically, which was to not be political at all. And later on, monarchs have tried to stick with that, to not be political. So yeah, I mean, the Queen saw a lot of. I'm always the most interested in people's childhoods, their family lives, their marriages, and like all of the different political scandals and things that she saw in her lifetime. I'm not as fascinated by that, unless things really stand out. I mean, she saw a lot. She lived through World War II. She wasn't queen then, but all of the loss of the British Empire that sort of started under her father, and then continued on through her. The empire became the Commonwealth. I think it was before them, but several countries, left the Commonwealth realms and either left completely or stayed in the Commonwealth of Nations, which is two separate things. They work together, but they're not actually. Monarch is not actually the head of state in those countries. So I can't remember the numbers. I think there's I'm sure people will correct me when I'm totally wrong, but there's something like 15 Commonwealth realms and then 40 Commonwealth nations. General numbers. So yeah, I mean, so she was the head of state of over a dozen countries. Canada, a lot of the Caribbean nations were just deciding to leave. Australia, but so she saw that massive shift that had built up in Queen Victoria's time, the British Empire, but then it all fizzled out. It all ended. These nations demanded independence, and got it in her time. And I think she did a good job of not stamping her feet, trying to keep them. That's all she could really do, and I don't think she had a lot of ability to stop them. But I think in some ways she smoothed things over. She made it, and she managed these things as best she could. That her reputation and her popularity speaks a great deal to that. That she that she didn't bungle it too badly. And there were things that she definitely did bungle and did get really wrong. The mine disaster, in Wales comes to mind. I can't remember the name of the town. Someone messaged it to me. But yeah, there was a massive mining disaster where a whole town, and especially a school full of children, was crushed during a mine avalanche. Aberfan, yeah, thank you. She didn't go several days. She didn't go to see. To greet the people who had lost loved ones, to give her condolences. Her husband went, other politicians went, other members of the family went, and she didn't go. And I think her reasoning was that she didn't want to be a distraction, but her decision not to go was very questioned. That they wanted the Queen there. They wanted her to embrace the people there and to give her condolences, and she didn't. So that I think she's on record saying is one of the greatest regrets of her reign. Another thing is the way that she handled the death of Princess Diana in 1997. I remember that very vividly. So I lived in England for several years as a kid, and I mean, the royal family's larger than life. Is for a young American kid that grew up on princesses and Disney, and then to come to England where it's a reality. And you might see, I remember one time we were on a double-decker tour bus in London, and we drove by Buckingham Palace, and the tour guide said that there was a garden party there. And so I remember kind of trying to look over to see, can I see the Queen? Can I see Princess Diana? Are they in the garden? And I didn't see anybody. But Diana was such an icon for so many people, and for me, and her passing was just an incredible shock. I remember that night, I think we had friends in town, friends visiting, and we were up. We'd been watching a movie, and for some reason, this was before cell phones, but for some reason, we decided to pause the movie for a second and turn on the TV, or maybe someone had to go to the bathroom or something, and so somebody turned on the TV, and the news was everywhere that Diana had been in this accident in Paris, and we didn't know until the next morning that she'd actually died. But it was very shocking and upsetting. And so the Queen's part in that was that when that happened, she was at Balmoral with her grandsons and Charles, and they stayed there. She kind of protected them and shielded these young boys who had just lost their mother. And she was, I think, more concerned with them and their mental health than with her role as queen, and to help the grieving nation, or to be there for the grieving nation. So Diana's death, and that again echoed Aberfan, that that the nation needed their queen to be there for her, and she wasn't there. And that again, I think, was a huge regret in her reign. But she did have, I mean, you're bound to make some mistakes, and some pretty serious mistakes over a 70-year career as anything. So was respected and remained respected until the end, and remained liked, and remained the most popular member of the royal family, who has a lot of very popular and pretty unpopular members. But she was always at the top of the polls as the most popular member, the one that kind of was seen to be keeping it together, keeping the family together, the monarchy, the Commonwealth. It remains to be seen if a lot more Commonwealth nations are going to jump the ship now that it's Charles who's the head of the Commonwealth instead of Elizabeth. So we'll find that out in the coming days and weeks and months. But yeah, she had a remarkable life. Her Annus Horribilis, 1992, when 3 of her 4 children all divorced or separated. They're just kind of different timelines of who was divorcing and who was separating. I think Charles and Andrew actually both divorced in 96, but they separated in 92. So that year was a lot of scandal, a lot of tabloid headlines about her children and their love affairs and their spouses' love affairs. And then also notably, Windsor Castle had a huge fire. That was always her favorite castle, going back to when she was a little girl and she stayed there during World War II. And there was for the repairs, and that was really, people were not very happy about that they were going to foot the bill for these massive repairs at Windsor Castle. And so then they ended up coming to a settlement that the Queen was going to cover. I think they decided to ticket sales for visiting Buckingham Palace were going to cover the repairs instead. And she conceded that she would pay salaries to some of the minor members of the royal family, the working members of the royal family. Is she keeping a lot of her money secret? But that's not really the topic to get into for today. That's an ever-present thing with an incredibly privileged family. But the Queen, she saw some rocky times in the last few years, in the last few decades, with her family, not living up to the kind of antiquated standards that she had. She was kind of emulating Queen Victoria and George VI, and this sort of perfect nuclear family, and no mistresses, no scandals, no divorce. And her sister Princess Margaret, famously divorced, first off wanted to marry a man who was divorced, and was told that she really couldn't and shouldn't. And then later did get married and then divorced. And her children, 3 out of their 4 marriages imploding very publicly, which I'm sure the Queen took very hard. But it seems to be that things have been also still complicated in the royal family, but kind of looking up with younger generations, and having love matches and better matches, and not picking people that were maybe a better companion, better spouse than generations. So that has been looking up. But of course, there's always the scandals with Andrew and Harry. And so, yeah, the Queen, she's the matriarch. She was the matriarch of the family. She's the matriarch of the UK and the Commonwealth. And she's gone now. And it's kind of shocking, and it's really gonna shake things up. So we'll see in the next days, weeks, months, years, how the family moves forward without their matriarch. And that's devastating to any family, but to one where your matriarch is also the queen is doubly, triply, quadruply devastating, and changing and shifting. And the queen's passing, I'm respecting her really wonderful, well-lived, full, incredible life. That her ups have been a lot higher, and her downs have been a lot more public than most people's. But yeah, she's gone. She's gone at 96 years old. She did this on the second of list for the longest reign in history. She surpassed the second and third place, and she stopped at second place. She did not outreign. She did outlive, but did not outreign Louis XIV, who his reign was 72 years, although he came to the throne at the age of 5. So he had a pretty big head start on her. He died at 76 or 77. So she did outlive him, but she did not reign him. And some people do question that because, do you count the reign when it starts at 5, or do you count from when he was, I think, 14 and was officially kind of handed the reins of power? But I think just on date of ascension, she's gonna stick to second place, which is still very, very respectable. Just near that, and especially now with with modern health, with modern science, monarchs, all people are living longer. So we are going to probably see a lot more monarchs that so it's kind of it's an interesting shift in monarchy. I'm going to have to let you go. It's about time for me to done for the day, to log off. But I am very interested to see what happens tomorrow. I'm going to bone up on all the news that I can find about what's going on with the Queen. We know what happened. She passed away, but what's going on with the royal family? What are the news? If you want to see more, as soon as I get off here, I'm going to try to supercharge my internet to get this video out here that is profiling her life, and just all the remarkable things that she saw and did during her life. I also have a video called What Will Happen When the Queen Dies, which is now incredibly relevant. And that profiles what the steps are that are already in motion. The code word that was always bandied about was London Bridge is down. So London Bridge is down officially. The Queen has died, and that very precise plan of action is now in place. The British royal family and the palace, the firm, they're all, the cogs are in motion. They're doing their thing. They're in their part. She's at Balmoral, so that adds an extra layer of ceremony, which I talk about in the video. That there was a plan in place if she died overseas, which I didn't think was going to happen with as old as she's getting, and she hadn't traveled for a while. But the plans, if she had died at one of her states, what will happen with her body, where she'll be taken, how they'll have in a few days her will be in state, and the public will be able to go and walk past her closed casket and pay their respects. So that's all in motion. But she died at Balmoral, so there will be triggered an extra layer of Scottish burial rites because she's in Scotland, which I want to. So they'll bring her body back to London to Westminster, and the funeral will be, I think, in about a week. Exact dates and times are video. I actually want to rewatch it and kind of rebone up on exactly what happened. Charles is king, and meet the government, the Vigil of the Princes, which is definitely going to be fascinating to see. That's when members of the royal family come unannounced to her coffin and stand vigil. And it'll be interesting to see who is there. I expect Charles and William will not want him to be there. So that was interesting to see if he's there. But for the first time, women, it was announced a while back that women will be part of the Vigil of the Princes. So I doubt in-laws will be included. It's usually like I've seen pictures of it, and there's like one prince on each corner, so 4 princes. So I imagine Princess Anne will almost certainly be included in the Vigil of the Princes. I mean, it might have been her 4 children, but it might be Charles, Anne, Edward, and Prince William. I would say that's probably my prediction of who will do the Vigil of the Princes. And I'm sure other members of the royal family will be there as well. This will be the one standing guard officially over her coffin, over her casket. So yeah, we'll see how all that plays out. Like I said, I have to let you go. I may hop back on tomorrow when we have more information, kind of give my analysis of what's going on and what it means, and just here to commiserate more about the death of Queen Elizabeth at 96 years old after a reign of 70 years. It's pretty incredible. Have a great night, everyone. Goodbye.